Today's topic is fruit trees, and particularly preparing fruit trees for planting through the winter. Now's the traditional time in store when deciduous fruit trees particularly are available. It is citrus time at this time of the year when a lot of the citrus fruits start producing fruit through the winter. So Melbourne's winters generally encourage planting of all sorts of fruit trees at this time of the year. Bare-rooted fruit trees are traditionally available now, and as I say, a good time to plant while the tree is dormant. These have all been produced on a farm where they're all grown in ground, and they have machines go through once the trees lose their leaves, dig them out of the ground, and the tree goes into sort of semi-dormancy through the winter, and that allows the trees to be sent to nurseries and then sold as what they call a bare-rooted fruit tree. Bare-rooted means it essentially comes with no pot and no soil around the root system. The roots, however, do need to remain damp through the bare-rooted time. In the nursery here, we put them into a soil just to maintain moisture around the root system. If they didn't have that, then the plant's inclined to dry out and desiccate, and won't transplant successfully and may in fact die out. So when they come into the store, the roots haven't been pruned. They've been essentially dug out of the ground and then transported to us in bundles, and we need to process them before we can put them in store. And generally that means removing any damaged roots, any broken roots, and reducing the amount of root system that's on the plant. That just helps with shock when the new plant gets put into the garden. And to compensate for the root pruning and any damage that might be done, you also have to prune the top of the tree. So any of the damaged roots get pruned off, any of the longer roots which are not needed are pruned off as well, and then the top of the tree is pruned. Now I've grabbed a peach as an example here. Peach at this time of the year coming with a lot of twiggy growth, and it's probably a good example to show you how to prune. You would follow the same principle with any deciduous fruit tree planting at this time of the year. With the exception of probably dwarf fruit trees. Things like dwarf peach or dwarf nectarine are very compact anyway, and even though they're coming in bare-rooted, there's not much on the tree that would need pruning because they're fairly balanced. But any other fruit tree generally would need pruning. And the aim is just to reduce the amount of branch and foliage on the tree, so that when the tree starts to grow away in the spring, it's not stressed in any way because the roots have been cut. So it's really to balance up what they call the root-shoot ratio. Because the roots have been cut, the top of the tree needs to be pruned to compensate for that. Now, a lot of people look at us in horror when we cut the trees because they have to be pruned hard at this time of the year. But it's going to be a lot better tree in the long run if it is pruned hard. It will make up a lot of growth in the first season, providing the conditions are right. So even though we're taking a lot of growth off the tree now, it does produce a lot of new growth in the spring, providing it gets food and gets enough water to establish a new root system on the plant. So the first 2 to 3 years with any planting of deciduous fruit trees is spent developing a framework from the branches so that the tree can sustain fruit probably after about 3 years. They will try to fruit within, say, a 3-year period, but most of those fruits really should be removed from the tree to allow it to establish properly. So I'll just show you now how to prune the tree. This, by the way, is where the tree has been grafted. When the tree is planted into its new spot in the garden, it's very important that that doesn't get planted too deep. This needs to remain above the soil surface. This one, as an example, I'll be planting at the soil level about there. You've got plenty of clearance between the soil level and where the graft is. If you plant it too low, the tree can be or too high, sorry, the tree can be a bit top heavy. So somewhere halfway on the stem there is enough. Eventually this calluses over and you don't really see it as the tree matures. But this was the initial graft or bud when the tree was propagated. These are generally grafted onto what they call a root stock. The root stock is like a vigorous variety of particular fruit, which the sign, this is what they call the sign, S-C-I-O-N. The sign is what's actually grafted onto the rootstock. The sign takes on the characteristics of the rootstock as the tree develops. So various reasons why they graft. If soils are, for instance in Melbourne, particularly heavy soils, the grafted tree is more tolerant of those types of soils. They graft for vigour. If you were to plant, say, a peach from a seed, you know, a pip out of the fruit itself, there's no guarantees, one, that you're going to get the same fruit. Grafting ensures that they're true to type. So this is an Alberta peach. Because it's grafted, it's going to be an Alberta peach. If you were to grow the seed from an Alberta peach, there's no guarantees that it's going to be that in future. So the main aim of when you're pruning it is to try and develop an open frame, bar-shaped tree. That's to encourage light down into the centre of the tree later on. If you can imagine these branches getting older and thicker, the sun needs to be able to get all the way down, because if the inside of the plant's too crowded, one, it probably won't fruit much, and two, there's a risk of disease spreading through the tree. So creating an open bar shape helps to get the sun down there, so you get fruit all the way down the branches, and it also encourages with airflow, or better airflow around the tree to reduce the disease risk. So something like this, I'd start off by pruning it probably a third to a half removed from the tree. You prune to an outward pointing bud to create that vast growth shape. So I prune it to that bud there. It's a nice big plump bud. Prune to just above the bud on an angle so the water runs away from the bud. You don't prune sloping back into the bud. So these buds are nice plump buds. There's generally 3 buds there. 2 of them will be growth buds. 1 of them will be a flower bud. So the flower bud obviously is what produces your fruit. You don't want that in the first year. So all I'm trying to encourage with this is those 2 growth buds to shoot out this year and start developing a framework. All the twiggy growths need to come off. If these aren't removed, they will die back anyway. Because the roots have been cut, the twiggy branches are the first things to die back if they're left on the tree. So I just work my way around the tree, pruning to an outward pointing bud. That one's in the centre of the tree, so I'll be inclined to remove the whole thing. There's an outward pointing bud there, I prune it to there. Nice big fat buds there, I prune that back. So I'm removing a lot of growth from the tree. There's a nice bud there, so rather than leaving these growths which are a bit twiggy and not going to have a lot of strength in them when the tree starts to shoot, pruning lower down onto a stronger branch will help with better growth. Now, what you'd probably decide next year is, because all these branches are going to throw out new growth, you'd have to decide on which branches you want to keep next year. So it might be 2 or 3 years before you get to the stage of a nice balanced tree, nice shaped tree. These little growths all come off, all the way around. That one there I would prune. You toss up whether it's worth keeping that branch, but this year I would. Take all those off. Good idea to have nice sharp secateurs when you're doing pruning. This branch here has got a bud there or there. Now I've been inclined to cut it back harder, probably to that bud. That's going to shoot out like that. These are all going to go out that way. This one here will probably come into there. and then these will come off. So you end up with a tree that looks pretty bare, with not much growth left on it, but you've got to think in advance of what the tree's going to do when it starts to grow. You've reduced the load on the tree because the root systems are being cut. Doesn't look like there's much left, but the tree, as I say, will gain a lot of growth in the spring. It would need some sort of fertiliser to encourage new growth in the springtime. At planting time, you would add some sort of organic matter to the soil, compost, animal manures, to try and improve the structure of the soil at planting time. Remembering the tree's going to be there a long time, so the better establishment it has, the better it's going to do in the long run. All fruit trees like an open, sunny position, a well-drained soil. That's important, particularly considering Melbourne soils are generally fairly heavy clay. So the soil needs to be improved well at planting time to help with establishment. You could use some sort of root stimulant on the tree when you first plant it. There's various brands that you could use, and I'd continue to use those probably for at least the first 12 months until the roots re-establish. In the springtime, these will all break out in little white fine feeder roots, and those are the white fine feeder roots are the ones you want to encourage so the tree gets the establishment happening. You would treat generally any deciduous fruit tree at this time of the year in the same way. Some of them have got just one central leader. As an example, say a fig. When you buy figs at this time of the year, they're basically a long stick with roots on the end. To encourage it to start to branch, you need to prune the top of the tree. So again, I'd prune it quite hard, and from where you prune it, it'll encourage the tree to branch lower down. Some apple trees have a central leader, which you still need to prune. I would leave it in the tree, but I would prune the top of it just to encourage the tree to branch as well. But all the fruit trees need pruning prior to planting or at planting time, and then next year they'll need a follow-up prune about the same time of the year in the winter. Good practice to spray a fruit tree in the winter time while it's dormant with some sort of a clean-up spray. There's a product called lime sulphur, which helps to kill off any disease or insect disease spores or any insect eggs that might be left on the branches from the previous year. So and it's got a really strong sulphur smell, but it's very good at killing off bugs. So you drench all the branches, you drench around the root system as well. That just helps to sterilise the tree, clean it, so it's ready to get going in the springtime. Some fruit trees are prone to disease through the growing season. Peaches are prone to a disease called leaf curl, which if you don't control will affect the amount and quality of fruit that you get. So it's worth getting into a routine of spraying with certain products to help with the control of those sort of things. They're not necessarily bad products. They're safe for us to use, and they're safe, even if the tree's got fruit on it. It's not going to worry it. And work out some sort of feeding regime, just a regular feed, 2 or 3 times a year through the growing season promotes growth, promotes better fruiting. Be aware of, say, birds. When you get fruit on the tree, the birds will obviously eat the fruit if you don't protect them. So you have to put some sort of netting over the tree as they come into the fruiting time. As I said, from this stage, it's going to be about 3 years before we get fruit. You spend the first 3 years developing the shape, so the branches are nice and strong to take the weight of the fruit later. And bearing in mind, various fruit trees need more than one tree to get fruit. Peaches, you only need one tree. Apples, pears, some plum varieties need 2 trees planted that are going to cross-pollinate each other, so you get fruit. Because you can wait 3 years with one apple tree, for instance, and unless you've got a pollinator, you're not going to get any fruit. So unless you've got a neighbour who's got a suitable tree, some people are tempted to plant 2 of the same tree, like 2 pink lady apples. It doesn't work. You have to have a another variety that's a suitable pollinator to cross-pollinate the tree. Not all fruit trees, nectarines don't need it, apricots don't need it. It's mainly pears, plums, and apples.
I've heard that apricots you're supposed to prune them earlier.
That's
right?
true. Apricots are pruned. They're very prone to a disease called gummosis. And if you've ever seen an old apricot tree and it has sap oozing out of the branches, and gummosis is a bacterial disease. It's in the vascular system of the tree. So it's not something you can spray to control. And recent years they've recommended you prune apricot trees earlier than what you would prune, say, a nectarine or a peach or an apple, for instance. Most of these are done, say, July in Melbourne in the garden. Apricot trees you have to do when the sap is still flowing through the tree to discourage gummosis. So they're generally done around about March as we're going into autumn. So the sap's still moving through the tree and the branches will heal before we get into the winter months. The gummosis is worse through the winter. Apricots are the main ones that are affected by it. So it's good practice. Also good practice to use clean, sterilised pruning equipment, secateurs or saws or loppers, whatever you're using. We are always taught to dip in between trees, dip the tools into methylated spirits. That's sterilized alcohol, so it sterilises the tool before you move on to the next tree. Because if you've got an apricot tree, for instance, that's got gummosis, you get that on your secateur, the spores on your secateur, and you transfer it to the next tree, they're just going to get it. So it's always a good habit to get into with any really pruning of deciduous plants, including roses. It's a good idea, then you reduce the risk of disease being spread.